I try to stay positive here. I figure there's already enough pessimism on YouTube, so I do my best to talk about the things I like, instead of focusing on things that I don't. However, I also think it's good to take a look at why something doesn't work. There's always room for criticism after all. Horror games are an incredibly common genre for indie games to pursue, but they're also incredibly easy to mess up. Unfortunately, since a Cyberpunk Ghost Story does just that. But it messes up in a few key ways, so leave it to me, Mr. I've only played maybe 6 horror games in my life, and 4 of them are Corpse Party, to break it down. Plus I gotta get my $20 worth out of this game somehow. I have an incredibly brief history with Sense. I think I read an article about it and skimmed its Kickstarter page back in, I wanna say 2018? I came across it because of the Vita version that was in development. I thought it was cool that the Vita was still getting support from indie developers, and I remember being interested when it compared itself to Clock Tower, but that was about it. I wouldn't think about it again until 2 years later when I saw it on the Coming Soon page on the Nintendo eShop. Again, I saw the Clock Tower comparison and thought, wow, 2D horror game, and threw it on the wishlist for later, not recognizing it as the same game, and not knowing that it had already been released elsewhere. A week later, I was bored on a Saturday and was looking for a new game to play. I remembered Sense, decided I wanted to try something outside my comfort zone, and one transaction later, I was playing the game. The reason I've mentioned all this is that I want my stance going into the game to be completely clear. I wasn't a Kickstarter backer, and I wasn't aware about the whole controversy pertaining to the character design and the crowd it was attracting. I'm just a dude who saw the game on the storefront and bought it with no prior research. So to make it crystal clear, no, I didn't buy this game to own the SJWs, and in the interest of completely fair criticism, I won't bring up the character designs or the frankly ham-fisted censorship dialogue peppered throughout the game. Don't get me wrong, I certainly don't care for it, but even disregarding that, and the story in general honestly, the game has plenty of problems as is. Critically, Sense fails in all the most important ways. It fails as a horror game by not being scary, and it fails as an engaging experience by refusing to respect the player's time. Just to set the stage, you play as Mei-Lin Mak in the 2083 cyberpunk landscape of Neo Hong Kong. Or wait, maybe it's 2084? Anyways, while waiting for a date, she finds herself whisked away to a haunted apartment complex teeming with ghosts. Thus it falls on you, the player, to help her survive and piece together the mystery of the complex while seeking a way out. Standard stuff, yeah? You do this from a side-scrolling perspective, evading ghosts and grabbing items to solve puzzles. Some of these puzzles are pretty well designed, and navigating the complex can be a challenge. While the game clearly shows points of interest and highlights texts of items that you may need later, as not to leave you completely out to dry, the game only occasionally tells you where you need to go, requiring liberal use of the map and your own memory to find out where the objects you may need are. And to keep you on your toes, saves and health items are finite, so you need to conserve them. It seems that all the pieces are in place for a good horror game, so where does it fall apart? I guess I'll start with that first bullet point of the game not being scary. Now when I say that, I don't mean that it isn't creepy. The game has pretty good sound design, and playing the game with headphones on in a dark room is a good way to get some chills. And early on, the ghost encounters are tense, and that's heightened by their designs, which are honestly pretty good as well. Unfortunately, it doesn't take long for the cracks to show, and once they do, the game's entire illusion of horror comes crashing down. The store page proudly proclaims that the game doesn't rely on jump scares, and I'm thankful for that, but I think it leans too far the other way. A lot of the time, a ghost's presence is announced with a camera pan or a cutscene, so they'll never really sneak up on you. They also only ever show up in certain locations, and while you may not know where they'll appear the first time, it doesn't take long to get a read on them. Comparing this to Clock Tower especially, these ghosts don't feel like a supernatural force hunting you down. They feel like a set piece, needed for when the game decides to check if you're paying attention. Even if the camera doesn't pan to announce there's a ghost near you, the stamina bar does that anyways. Normally when you're exploring you have infinite stamina. Thank God, by the way, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. When in the presence of a ghost, however, your stamina becomes limited, only allowing you to sprint for a short period of time, in an attempt to ratchet up the tension. Not only does it fail at this, as stamina recovers very quickly and the ghosts move incredibly slowly, but it has the side effect of announcing when you're in danger. Stamina isn't depleting, you're safe. Stamina suddenly going down, that means there's a ghost nearby. Thus, the only real tension comes in the hallways and hoping you're not sprinting right into a ghost, but that implies that these ghosts are actually a threat. Again, they're slow, and when they attack, they have a decently long windup, which means sprinting past them is absolutely an option. There's a hiding mechanic that's used exactly once, I counted, but even that seems moot. If you have even the most basic of survival instincts, these things won't touch you. Even if they do, the game throws plenty of jade bracelets at you, so you'd have to be actively trying to die. The only times my health got dicey were during the combat portions about halfway through, and that's because they aren't exactly great either. You press X to swing the sword when the prompt shows up, and either you get hit, the enemy gets hit, or you both get hit? But even though my health got low, I still never died because of a ghost. You know how I did die though? The number of instant kill sections peppered throughout the game. Again, I've played Corpse Party, so I'm not a stranger to swift and graphic deaths. But while some of the choices will pretty obviously lead you to failure, others aren't. My first death was pick a drink from the vending machine, but if you pick the soda, you die, with no hints indicating that it would happen. That isn't fair, and it sure isn't scary either. Yeah, I guess it was a little bit shocking, but as soon as I hit the main menu, the thought that I hadn't saved in a while crossed my mind, and once I realized that I had lost 15 minutes of progress to an arbitrary 1/4 kill chance, that shock quickly turned into annoyance. I really tried to make it through the game using the finite saving system, but save points are really spread out, and once the game made it clear it was going to be pulling stuff like this, I gave up and used the quick save option. You only get one slot with this, but you can do it almost anywhere, and when the game's made it clear it'll kill you on the drop of a hat, you gotta take measures to ensure you're not wasting time. Unfortunately, Sense likes to waste your time anyways. I guess we're on that second point now. When Sense said that it took inspiration from Clock Tower, unfortunately it also carried over some of the questionable progression methods. Sense loves sequencing, as in not letting you do one thing until you've done another, and what I can only assume is a method to pad out the game time. This starts very early on too. Let me give you an example from the third screen of the game. On the road you'll find 5 pieces of a charm. Obviously you're going to need to pick these up for someone, but the game doesn't let you. So first you need to walk forward so that you can drop your ID so it falls under a car. Then you need to track down the owner of said car. Since he's looking for the charm pieces, now you can pick them up. Then you have to bring them back and he'll tell you to burn them. So you go do that and then you go back to him again, and finally he'll move the car and you can get your ID. Does that sound annoying? Well, it is, and it only gets worse once you're inside the apartment complex. Again, objects of interest are highlighted, so there's a good chance you'll know where the object you need for a puzzle is, but rather than rewarding you for thorough exploration by letting you pick up the item and solve the puzzles as you go along, the game instead opts to have you backtrack back and forth all the time, usually with no threats in the way as well. The most egregious example is the third floor. Let me present you with a very real scenario. You've just got the box cutter from room 306. The box you need to cut is all the way in the storage room near 301. So you go there, passing through room 304 because the floor collapsed, cut the box and get the mirror piece. So now you go back to room 304 to complete the mirror, but it says you need HG80. Well, if you know the periodic table well enough, you know that's mercury, and that there'll be some in the thermometer on the balcony of room 306. So you run back there, but uh-oh, the thermometer rolled off and now it's hanging on a nail. So now you need to run all the way back to the storage room to grab the back scratcher, and either on the way to or from room 306, you need to investigate the backpack in room 304, that now finally lets you grab a ruler. With that, you can go back to the 306 balcony, get the thermometer, head back to room 304, and finally you can solve that puzzle. There are no enemies along the way, it's just you and one long, annoying process. Actually, there is one enemy, the loading screens. I know it's an indie game and asking for an initial game load might have been too much, but it's not even that any one loading screen is really long, it's just that there's so many of them. Every time you enter a new room, there's a loading screen, and with how quickly you'll move through areas once you have a slight idea of where to go, it's just a barrage of loading screens, back to back, one after the other. That process I just mentioned, I counted. At minimum, it takes up to 31 loading screens. 31! I swear, if I uploaded the raw footage, odds are one of the auto-generated thumbnails would land on a loading screen. And I hear the loading's even worse on the Vita. Maybe they're better on the other systems, I'm playing on the Switch if that wasn't clear, but man, this is just crazy. I would have settled for a longer loading screen that lets the floor load entirely, easily, because it's hard to feel anything but annoyed when there's this much stopping. Also, and again, indie game, the presentation just doesn't feel up to snuff. The 2.5D environments look pretty good, but a lot of the character animations look really stiff and honestly kinda cheap. And the frame rate. I've said it again and again, I don't mind a lower frame rate as long as it's consistent, but there are some rooms here that chug, even when nothing's going on. There's also a bunch of other technical issues. One time the game crashed back to the home screen, and another time it bugged out while I was waiting for this key to cool, subjecting me to a closed room where I could do nothing but run around and wait endlessly for a key that wasn't gonna cool, until I eventually had to quit back to the main menu, which cost me 15 minutes of progress. And stuff like that really drives the point home, doesn't it? It's hard to feel scared with this many technical cracks, but it sure does make the game feel a whole lot longer. Look, I didn't go in the sense wanting to bash it for the sake of a video. Honestly, I really wanted to like this game. While it was downloading, I was actually thinking of doing a comparison video with another horror game, hoping that the gameplay of Sense would solve some of the problems I had with the other one, even if I preferred the other's aesthetic. But it just became very clear very early on that Sense just wasn't doing it. It isn't scary, it's not even very tense, it's just plain boring. The worst thing a game can do is bore me. When a game's boring and is actively trying to waste my time as much as possible, not even so bad it's good or the sunk cost fallacy can save it. So no, I can't in good faith recommend you play Sense. If you're looking for a 2D horror game starring a purple-haired anime girl wearing a yellow jacket, well, first you have some incredibly specific tastes, but I'd recommend playing Tokyo Dark. While that game has its own share of problems to deal with, at least it's an engaging game that doesn't waste your time. I want to cap this off with one final piece of transparency, though it might not be terribly surprising if you've made it this far, but I didn't finish Sense. Though I normally don't play through games all the way when recording footage, I try to play through an entire game before I decide to make a video on it, so that I have as complete an opinion as possible. If you think this invalidates everything I said, that's whatever, but I just couldn't do it. The breaking point for me was the end of the 5th floor, when the game suddenly crashed on me, costing me a half hour of progress. As I sat on my Switch's home screen, my eyes wandered to the other game sitting on the hotbar, and I thought to myself, is this really what I want to do? Is this really how I want to spend the last few hours of my Saturday night? Do I really want to go back in, deal with all this again, and finally finish Sense? So anyways, Trials of Mana is pretty fun.